Hey, good morning. Um, this wasn't really that planned. Surprise, surprise. I kind of like to do live streams Saturday mornings when I can, when I have the opportunity. The house is still quiet. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. And I usually have things on my mind. I need to catch up on PBK's live stream, which I listen to in bits and pieces because I was at work, and I need to I don't know, I need to think. I listened to a video this morning. It was relatively short, of PBK talking about it's members only, but I think he'll probably release it broadly, I would think, entitled "Don't Take the Bait, Learn from Jesus." And it's kind of on, I guess he uses two things. He uses Peugeot's video of, what is it? Peugeot's video of weaponizing ambiguity, talking about the Olympics, which I have not seen. And then he plays a little bit of Sam Tripp and Bethel's conversation about, which I haven't followed either, Megan, what's her name? Megan Bashon, talking about, I don't know, like political people weaponizing Christianity and trying to like overtake evangelicalism, and it's kind of like pick a sides ism. You know, Peugeot talks about this in his video, which Paul highlights, and this is the take a side kind of a thing. And this is really what I mean. What's up, Peter? By my little term, the exclusivist religion of the right side of history. And it's obviously a play on, that little phrase is like, well, at least, or the somewhat pride or false security people have of being on the right side of history. And it reminds me of this little phrase that I heard once that I really love, when I don't really like to tell people where I heard it from or who said it, because of the very tendency that we have of pick a sideism, of, and what Paul is getting at and don't take the bait, and what Peugeot is getting at and don't take the bait, which is essentially the culture war, the exclusivist religion of the right side of history. But there's this quote, which is the last acceptable remaining form of bigotry, so a lot of adjectives, is against those with whom we disagree. And I think that's right. That's just another way to say essentially identitarianism. You set up a line rooted in an abstraction, a definitional understanding of something. This is where I've been saying Paul made that video on emissarianism, riffing off of Ian McGilchrist, and right brain, left brain stuff, map territory. And so you just take a definitional understanding, Sam, good morning, and you say, okay, this side or this side. I mean, whatever. The obvious political American culture war is like Republican, Democrat, Kamala Harris, Trump, whatever. And what's up, Pete? I need to catch your whole live stream thing too, because you were on there a long time with Kale and PVK yesterday. But and you say like, okay, this side good, this side bad. It's this weird Jonathan Haidt kind of phenomenon, and happiness hypothesis phenomenon of a this came up in the live stream actually, because Jonathan Haidt describes a conservative as the one who has a disgust, psychologically is one, and sociologically is one who has a disgust impulse at the other. So the person at the wrong side of history, right? The person who's on the wrong side of the culture war. That person, like, ugh, like they're gross, they're disgusting, you could say evil, wicked, wrong, whatever. And this is the hard tension, again, of like that I try to get into with personalist knowing is like you can is it possible to disagree with someone about an abstract idea of this culture war, exclusivist religion on the wrong side of history, that don't take the bait binary of which side of this line do you stand on, and not be disgusted by someone who disagrees with you? And people would say, well, I don't know. I think a lot of people would say, depending on certain topics, that's possible, but on other topics, it's just not possible. And I haven't even gotten to Rod. Good morning, Phlebas. Yeah, well, Phlebas Keller, one of my favorite Keller things that I mention a lot. I should just look it up and play it on here. I might. And I need to start talking about DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. But is Tim Keller, a long time ago, I think it's a Gospel Coalition thing, which he's on there with Matt Chandler and Michael Horton. Matt Chandler, I tried to listen to a Matt Chandler interview the other day with somebody who's telling me about it, McMo. I still can't do Matt Chandler. He's just he's great in a lot of ways. He just has little ways that he speaks that are just like cultural tells for me, where like he reminds me too much of my Young, Restless, and Reformed days, and I can't do it. I can do it, but I don't like to do it, and I don't do it that long. Anyhow, but Keller had in that video, it's How to Disagree. I'm going to look it up and cue it up because I don't want to watch it yet. Oh, there it is. It's just like automatic in my search history. How to Disagree. So we'll play that in a little bit. But so something I've been thinking a lot about is this dialectical behavioral therapy. I've been going down, it's like my new rabbit trail going down the deep well. And it's essentially like I did a community post on YouTube where I have a video of Marshall Linehan, who is the creator and of DBT, and it's so good. The video that I play is so good, but there's a couple, I might cue them up too. There's a couple shorter videos where she describes because dialectical, let's look it up. Dialectical is is one of those words where she was saying in that thing that she wanted to entitle her book something dialectical behavioral therapy, but the publishers wouldn't let them, so they made her entitle it cognitive behavioral therapy, because they just said if you put dialectical, it'll just turn people off. So like dialectical is pertaining to dialect, logically reason through the exchange of opposing ideas, or okay, no, be quiet, Discord. So refers originally to a dialogue between people holding different points of view about a subject, but wishing to arrive at the truth through the reasoned argumentation. And but you could even think of it as like, I often think about it with like it's rooted back in Socratic method. It's rooted in an emergent articulation of a new articulation, a deepening understanding of something through a contradiction, through a dialectic, through dialogos. Can we come to mutual and greater understanding, even if we don't necessarily agree about all the detail? Is like through that process, can we come to a greater understanding and maybe a deepened and greater relationality? And I'm excited to hear about this, Chad. He says, I had a massive revelation this morning. This dialectical behavioral therapy reminds me so much of AA stuff, Chad, in a lot of ways. So anyhow, yeah, and Rod says, yeah, it's the only treatment protocol to show any promising results for those with borderline personality disorder. Yes, and because I was talking to Rod about this yesterday, yes, that's true from what I know, but also it's like this is how it relates to AA too, is people with borderline personality disorder are so difficult to deal with that she was through the suffering of her own suffering and of of dealing with the suffering of clients, that tension, that conflict, that difficulty, she learned and evolved, and there emerged this therapeutic model out of that pain and suffering. And it does help, like evidentially, empirically studied, using empirical studied things. Because in that video, that longer video that I posted in my community thing, she's constantly talking about, it's very evidence-based, T-Rod. And she's done lots of studies on it, and she constantly tells people, like, look at the evidence, look at the evidence, look at the evidence. You don't believe me? Come here. I'll show you. I'll prove it to you. Look at the evidence. And even like suicidality, it's one of the only effective ways of treating people with constant suicidality, and at least therapeutic model. And but I was saying this to Rod, and I was talking about my wife with this too. It's almost though that people with borderline personality disorder are so extreme that like you're forced to do, you get desperate. And so you'll do something like Alcoholics Anonymous. You'll actually follow the steps. You'll actually do the work because you're so desperate, because you're like, it's either this or I'm going to die. Like I'm suffering so much because I have such sensitivity and hyper emotionality that like I can't function in the world. My relationships are like, I'm suffering, and everyone around me is suffering. And so you're forced to actually do these steps of dialectical behavioral therapy. But the thing is like these things I've just seen, these would benefit anyone. There's tons of people who aren't well in our society who just don't have such extreme emotions that they are almost graciously forced to follow something that makes them well. But then oddly, like an alcoholic who actually does the steps, they can become psychologically and mentally and spiritually and physically so well from what they learn through the steps that they then surpass the health of someone who's culturally successful, because they just don't have such extreme emotions that they've found all sorts of coping mechanisms to help them deal with their suffering. Yeah, exactly. They're sometimes referred to as emotional burn victims. I mean, it's a very complicated thing, but dialectical behavioral therapy is really pretty simple. And so in the video, so I do want to play some of Marsha Linehan's videos, and I do want to play this Tim Keller video to root back on that. It's like how to disagree with people, because these things aren't interrelated. Dialectical behavioral therapy and how to disagree are interrelated, and it's related to the culture war. This is like a bigger mosaic vision thing. How to disagree with someone and to not have that conservative disgust factor. This is almost like that, and it's related to Jonathan Haidt's book, that whatever the title is or the subtitle is, like how do good people disagree about things, and it's related to politics, which is related to culture war. And it's related to Christ and Antichrist. It's just how these things always emerge. It's related to Tom Holland stuff of like the secular West being Christian, and even like the woke people using, what's the term? It's the kind of death ritual, is that and because that's Christ and Antichrist. The West is fundamentally Christian, and so then you put at the top of the hierarchy victim protection, and then you scapegoat Girard and demonize and culture war those who don't put the victim at the highest thing, that then you'll sacrifice everything for, and a malevolent mother thing. Like all of this stuff is related. But how do you disagree with people? Keller and the dialectical thing is it's rooted in relational ontology and personalism. That's why I'm talking about personalist knowing and related to dialectical behavioral therapy, because that's what the dialectical behavioral therapy is about, is whoever you have a conflict with, you have this simultaneous reciprocity of seeming opposites. You have to acknowledge that two opposing things are true at the same time. It's very Taoist, which is very Christian. St. Maximus, the identity of identity and non-identity. And so you have to acknowledge that what this person is experiencing is real. Their suffering, their symptoms, their extreme emotional reaction to something that seems ridiculous to you because you don't relate and have that same reaction. There's something true in it. Can you see the seed of truth in it, even if it's not completely properly integrated? And that's all a spectrum thing. Like somebody who has borderline personality disorder is just like on this end of the emotional spectrum. And just because you don't have that exact same reaction to something doesn't mean that they're not feeling something that's true. This is the whole facts don't care about your feelings. Then that's why that's like the most extreme version of being in the two poles in dialectical behavioral therapy of reasonable mind and emotional mind. And they say the integration, the overlap between those two things is wise mind. And that's where you try to be. But you have to simultaneously acknowledge two things: full validation of their experience, and they're very careful of saying this, which doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean you agree with them in the abstract reasoning, rational mind thing, but you fully validate them, which is basically just saying the relationship is primary. Again, it's a relational ontology. But then you also acknowledge the need of change, because that's how Marsha Linehan developed this therapy. I want to eventually play videos where she talks about it, but because she's awesome. She's so good. Like, I'm obsessed with her lately. She's a beautiful, beautiful person. She even talks about because she had this. I think she was diagnosed with borderline or one of the first people or something. And then she evolved this therapy to help other people, very much like AA. And she basically said, these people are in hell. And if they're in hell, I'm going to go there and get them out. In as much as I can, which is like the idea of the bodhisattva. It's also Christ harrowing hell. It's also St. Paul that my boy Jason talks about all the time, is like, I wish that I were accursed for the sake of my brethren. That's the second death that Jason talks about. Yes! For once, I'm following your Mosaic Vision thing on first pass. Praise the Lord. All right, so I want to play this Tim Keller video. It's not as good. I don't think it. I love it, and I'm going to play it because I talked about it. But it's not as good as the other one, as the Michelle or Marsha. I don't know why I keep calling her Michelle. Explain that to me. The Marsha Linehan video. Okay, let's play this. Shh. Stop it. My computer is.
How do we talk to people who differ with us about biblical and theological convictions without, in a way that's faithful, at the same time it's winsome and Christian? Is there a way to do that? What are your thoughts?
I think there's definitely a way to do it. It's been my experience that it works best in the context of relationship. And so I've never had an experience of just kind of lobbing grenades.
What? It works best in the context of relationship? It's the only way it works. It's the only way it works. Anything that doesn't come from faith is sin. Trust. If you don't trust someone, you can't hear them. You can't. Not in the way that we're talking about. Okay, onward.
Nades, that kind of thing working, characterizing a theological position. But really, I found that if you're in a relationship with a guy and have shown genuine concern for him and life and ministry, then those conversations tend to go much better. I think when you categorize someone too quickly and you don't have that relationship and you haven't got to the bottom of their motivation, because what you find in I know what I found in ministry quite often is guys who genuinely love the Lord and genuinely want to see people know and worship Jesus, that have not, for one reason or another, either had the mentors that other guys have had, or hadn't had someone love them enough to press them and go, well, what do you do with this text, or what do you do with this idea? Or you've got great horizontal theology, but you have poor vertical theology, and there's something about knowing the nature and character of God that really fleshes out things on the ground. And so
that's the kind of stuff with Chandler that just drives me nuts. because yes, but see what he's doing? He's trying to go into abstractions again. But like, this is where I push. This is what I mean, the radical implications of personalist knowing, even as it relates to Christian theology. You can't abstract that. This is the radical implications of the incarnation. Is how do you know God? In the face of Jesus Christ. How do you know Jesus Christ? In the face of your enemy. This is this is dialectical behavior. And sometimes the enemy are people in your house. Sometimes it's your neighbor. Sometimes it's your wife. Sometimes it's your children. Sometimes it's people. Love and hate are closely related. You can't hate someone that you don't love to some degree. The love is underneath that hate. Otherwise, it'd be complete apathy. It'd be complete indifference. Indifference is the opposite of love, not hate. And root it, I don't know. It's just don't root your Christianity in abstraction, please. Okay, onward.
There are several guys I walk with now that we would be in different universes in philosophies of ministry. And we're maybe in the solar system in certain theologies, but we would definitely have differences there too. But by loving them, knowing them, staying in contact with them, and trying to learn from them myself and what they do well, has really given us a platform to have that dialogue where it doesn't feel like they're being attacked or it's the reformed guys coming to get them again. And so that's been my experience to this point.
Yeah, I think I would just second what Matt's saying about the importance of wherever possible personal relationships, because it's a lot easier to caricature somebody you've never met. And I've had instances where I have maybe gotten someone wrong, not intentionally, but I've gotten that person wrong and have had a great conversation, started a friendship, and realized that was not exactly the position that he or she held. And it's the ninth commandment. We've got to represent even our theological opponents in a way that they would recognize. I tell my students in class, if you write a paper where you are critical of a particular person, even if it's a well-known philosopher or writer, you have to state the position in terms that person would recognize before you earn the right to critique it.
That's one of the rules, I think. And you're saying sometimes you actually don't do that well when you don't know the person.
It helps. Yeah, it helps. And then it helps also to critique. You can't have a personal relationship with everybody you critique, especially in writing. It's hard to dig Schleiermacher up and exhume him for interrogation. But
these are the limitations of the written medium. It's McLuhan stuff. The medium and the message, and Jesus Christ is the one place where the medium and the message are the same thing. Or Christ in me. I would say it's the same thing when you're fully integrated. But that's the limitations of the definitional understanding, the literal understanding of the written word, and the further up, further in medium of long form conversations and podcasts and YouTube, which is different. It has its own, anyhow. I think you can do it. Somewhat you can metaphorically interact with someone through the medium of the written word if it's done really well on both sides of that relation through that technology. I've had it happen. I think people have had it happen, but it has a lot of limitations.
Wherever possible, that actually changes then in the way you do things, I think, in the cases where you can't develop a personal relationship with people. It just changes you.
So you don't like Schleiermacher? I completely misread
one of my
you.
Favorite.
I completely misread you.
See, relationship right here. Here we go.
I'm really glad I had this conversation with you. Yeah, I think one of the rules definitely is to say give the other person's argument position in a way they not only recognize, but in some cases might even say that's as good as I could have done it.
Right.
And then when you start to criticize it, they feel like you've paid me the respect of really listening to me.
Yeah.
There's no doubt if if I feel like someone starts criticizing me before they've really listened to me, then I actually tend to write off the criticism, and maybe I should, because it's not really me; it's who they think I am.
Yeah.
I think it might be. Here's another. What do you think of this as a rule of engagement? I heard that Archibald Alexander, who used to teach polemical theology at the old Princeton.
Not a great title.
I know.
No.
I think it probably meant
No, it's not.
apologetics, but I think it's a little broader, and it's not a bad idea. You're a seminary professor. Try to get that in the curriculum. Polemical theology. He said, do not assign a position to an opponent that he will not own, even though you think it's the necessary consequence.
Right. Now, see, that's something that I think even
hard.
in our circles we have trouble with. And you see it not just in Reformed circles, but you see it in other circles where.
All right, that's all I want to do with that. Whatever. You can look it up. Tim Keller, Michael Horton, Matt Chandler, if you want to watch more of it. Because Keller also said the main thing, like when you're stating someone's position, not like do the benefit of listening to them. Like actually listen and actually ask questions. This is one of my little pet peeves, even in sometimes TLC things, is when you are having a live stream or a conversation, like it's such a subtle thing, like how much you're speaking, how much space are you making for the other person? Are you asking questions where you really want to know the answer and you're really curious, or it's just like rhetorical, or it's just a means to like follow your own egoic intellect and understanding of wherever you want to get? Steel man, baby. Also, this is a great comment by Rod. Rod has a few good comments in here because he understands this stuff. Like, I think this one, people like BPD, people being the canary in the coal mines, I think that's great. I very agree. And this is very true. I think their coping capacities are simply inadequate for the demands of modern life. While the rest of us slowly go crazy, they just break. Agreed. And this is what I said to you. It's kind of like, it's related to psychedelics, because this is a Sturgill Simpson line of metamodern sounds in country music when he's talking about DMT, and he's saying, some say you might go crazy, but then again, it might make you go sane. Like, who are the crazy people out there? Are the crazy people on the street crazy, or the people who are just going through the hamster wheel thing of going in office jobs like the Matrix, who are somewhat like, think about Free Guy, Ryan Reynolds, that are just the NPC people just doing the things of life and consuming. Who's crazy? Who are the crazy ones? I don't know. It's a deep question. All right, but I want to play a couple. Michelle, short. They're short. What up, Nico? Nick, I want to play a couple of these because these are fantastic. And then I'll open it up because I do want to play with folks a little bit before I have to go. Taya, what up, my boy? Okay, let's do this. Are we working? My internet is slow. I don't know why.
I've been transformed by the very therapy that I developed. Because once I realized that I had to teach the clients acceptance, I realized at that very same moment in my own personal life, I had somehow lost my ability to accept, and that I was going to have to learn it myself. And so I ended up taking a sabbatical point or time off from my job. What I found out when I went to the first Buddhist monastery was within days, I knew that I had found exactly what my clients needed. I had no doubts about it. I figured that out right away. That acceptance was exactly what they needed, but that they had a way of teaching it that I could translate. My problem was I tried to take it stock and barrel to my clients. At Shasta Abbey, the basic message was all the time to try to radically accept everything and to let go of desires and what you want. So we got jobs every single morning. And so it was the idea of practicing letting go of wanting a particular job. If you were sweeping, they would tell you when the bell rang for work to stop, they would tell you, stop in the middle, because finishing is just your own thing. You're trying to do something you want to do, just let go. So it was this whole practice of just constantly, moment by moment, letting go
Not my
of
will,
what
but your
you
will.
want and radically accepting what is. It was the first environment I'd ever been in. It was completely non-sexist. I thought I'd die and gone to heaven. I'm not kidding. It was so unbelievable. Men and women would get the same jobs. There was no real distinction. I mean, admittedly, it may not have been helpful if I hadn't just completely thrown myself into it. But since I decided ahead of time that I had to learn this, my only option was just to do everything I was told, just throw myself in. And I was a student, so there were 8 of us. We did everything together. It was really the practice of letting go of having to have what you wanted
Ooh.
at any moment.
Ooh.
And the recognition that you didn't have to always have whatever it was you wanted. That had a big effect in some ways on the therapy, that in the sense that I try to teach clients suppressing what you want is.
Maybe your side doesn't have to win. Maybe the right side of history, as you conceive of it, doesn't have to happen, and the world will keep going on. Maybe in your conflict with your brother or friend or spouse, they don't have to see things your way. And maybe things will be okay. Maybe you can radically accept it.
It's not the way to go. You have to radically accept that you want something you don't have, and it's not a catastrophe. And so I stayed there for 2 months. Then I went to Germany to the Catholic priest. It was actually the first time in my life I ever talked to someone who actually understood me, the spiritual part of me. Given that my spiritual part of myself is the core of myself, more central than anything else about me, having that understood was an amazing experience. It had a transformative effect on me. What it did is it gave me a home. I am now convinced that it was the practice of radical acceptance every moment that will transform you. I don't have the slightest doubt. It would transform everyone. But it has to be a regular practice. And radical acceptance doesn't mean you don't try to change things, because you only have to radically accept the moment that you're in and the past. But you can try to change the next moment. You can't change anything if you don't accept it, because if you don't accept it, you'll try to change something else that you think is reality.
Yes.
So radical acceptance is simply the radical acceptance that reality is what it is. And if you want to change it, then you work on changing it, which is perfectly legitimate also. But I think it's hard to change something.
Okay. Nico, I'm not trying to single you out, but this is exactly what I'm talking about with the Keller video. Her video, what is it? It's a 3. I'm guessing, maybe I'm wrong. Is this your first exposure to Marsha Linehan? It's a 3-minute, 30-second video. I'm going to play another one. I would almost bet my life that what you're reacting to isn't what she's saying. This is the Keller video. Before you can disagree with someone, you have to understand what they're saying. Give the benefit of listening first before you disagree. Please.
If you don't accept it. You can't change anything if you don't accept it, because if you don't accept it, you'll try to change something else that you think is reality. So radical acceptance is simply the radical acceptance that reality is what it is. And if you want to change it, then you work on changing it, which is perfectly legitimate also. But I think it's hard to change something if you don't accept it in the first place.
It's hard to change something if you don't accept it in the first place. You just now, okay, nope, go back, because we want one other one to play. Oh, come on. Sorry, guys, I didn't have this queued up right. I should have had it. Which one was it? There's another one I played. Okay, this one is fantastic because I posted that in my community thing, but there was another short one. Here we go. How she learned it. Okay. Core components. What's the other one I played? This is where I think this is where Grimm has like his things when he doesn't have his stuff together. Here we go. Emotion regulation strategies. That's the other one I've listened to on these, but these are all short and they're super good. I'm going to play one more and then I'll open it up and people can come in and we can fight a culture war about how I'm wrong.
Borderline personality disorder is primarily a pervasive disorder of emotions. It is the inability to regulate emotions. And by emotions, I'm talking about a very broad spectrum, not only how you feel, but the physiology of emotions, the experience of emotions, and the actions associated with emotions. It's a group of people with extraordinarily intense emotional suffering who are also simultaneously unable to change their suffering and regulate the behavior that comes from that suffering. So the problem there is, how do you teach emotion regulation? So I developed an entire module of strategies for regulating emotions. And those strategies have been taken from the science of emotions and from the evidence-based treatments that treat emotions. You know, if we had a person who had a treatment for one emotion, I simply looked at what do those therapists tell that patient to do, and then I repackaged all that as a skill. I would have to say about half of my patients, if you ask them how they feel, what their emotion is, they're functioning like they're looking in a fog. They look down and they think, I have no idea. They have no idea what their emotion is. So the first thing we have to do is teach them how to do that. And we have strategies which are very effective for that. And then we have to teach them how to regulate. So there are many strategies for regulation. You can look at the vulnerability factors. So often you're very emotional today because of something that happened yesterday, because you didn't sleep, because you didn't eat, because of some stress from yesterday. So one of the things we look at is, what are the factors that make you vulnerable to being emotional, and how can you change those factors? So we look at that. We look at, what is the prompting event, meaning what happened right before? Is that something that you can change? If you can, that would be teaching problem solving. If you can't change it, we go to the next, which is what's your interpretation or what's your thoughts about that. We have a skill called check the facts. How do you check the facts to see if your interpretations are correct? So on and on. I mean, there are a lot of different sub-skills in emotion regulation. We know that emotion regulation skills are effective. We've got data on just that all by itself. They are effective in teaching people how to regulate emotions.
All right, that wasn't the one. I thought I was going to play the one where she gives specific examples and she talks about really well. There's another short clip, but you can search it out if you want it, I guess, about where she talks about, and maybe she did and I missed it because I was looking at comments, about what she means by radical acceptance and simultaneously accepting change. Because that's the thing. When people are balking at radical acceptance, they're not acknowledging that that there's a simultaneous need of change, an acknowledgement of change. So it's not just like love is love, you're okay the way that you are, you don't have to do anything, everything about you is perfect. It's just that I accept you as a person, and I accept your experience. Doesn't mean it's not agreement. You know, that's all right. The serenity saying, yeah, it's like, Lord, yeah, exactly. I don't know what the serenity prayer is. Everybody probably knows it though. Okay, I don't have it. Go to Cassidy Vanderkamp's information addict thing. She like closes with the serenity prayer every time. So I'll open this up for a little bit until my fam starts waking up, and then I'm gonna go. And then people can just, if people come in and they want to hang out, they can just hang out on their own until maybe, somebody else shows up. What up, Rob?
Morning, Luke.
Look at this. I am blessed. I am blessed with your presence. Is this the first time you've come on my stream?
It may be. It's one of my first live streams ever. I don't usually do this. You're touching on a subject that I know at least a little bit about, and have a particular interest in. So I figured, this is a good time to try anyway. I got my coffee and still a little froggy.
Well, wonderful. If you have any immediate thoughts, we know Chad's gonna. he has thoughts like I have thoughts, but if you have anything immediate to say, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I have the unfortunate, we probably would not, at the time something like a diagnosis would not have been available, but I was very likely raised by an undiagnosed borderline. I think by today's standards, that would have been the sort of the rubric that would have been used to try to make sense. Experienced a lot of trauma, a terrible car accident that killed the father and one of the sisters, and the entire family was badly injured. And I think she was maybe 12 at the time, something like that. So lost half her family, and it was in rural Maine, so they were all sent to separate hospitals. So they were immediately atomized and separated from each other. I think her mother broke her back and was in traction for like 6 months. And, my mother was told she'd never have children. And, this is a story that I knew well because it was repeated many, many times. If you met her, a week before she died at 83, you would hear the story and it would sound like it happened last year. I mean, in some sense, it was a trauma that she lived and relived. And so, needless to say, in adulthood, I would find myself inexplicably attracted to certain kinds of emotional signatures in women. So this is in some ways a lived a kind of expertise. I'm particularly interested in this. And as I said in my comment, I instantly understand why you're making the connection you're making, because if you're in that world, they have something called chosen relationships and unchosen relationships. And they make that distinction. Because if it's a romantic relationship, at least theoretically, you're choosing to be there, right? But if it's a child or a parent or a sibling, a family member, it's a very different thing, and it's a very thorny thing, because in some ways you're sort of trapped in that labyrinth with this person. So everybody in that system is being stretched to their absolute limit, right? And so here's where DBT becomes a real lifesaver for at least some. It's not a cure-all either, but at least it's showing promising results. And basically I was sort of making the point of the comment. The point that I would make, and this is kind of the conclusion I drew after observing this very closely and very carefully and very painfully, and doing a ton of research and deep dives and reading books and just trying to make sense of it, right? Is these are highly sensitive people, and we call it a disorder. We treat them as if there's something wrong with them. Dysfunction, right? Dis doesn't function, work doesn't work, right? Dysfunction, it doesn't work. But you can easily see that they're in a system that's making demands of them that they simply can't live up to. In the more extreme cases, I said they're treated like emotional burn victims. Mm-hmm. But you still have to find a way to relate to them, particularly if it's an unchosen relationship. So how do you do that? It's a deeply, deeply human, painful thing that defies categories. It defies, propositions. And so the connection you're making to how do you navigate something like a culture war where everyone's inflamed and everyone's waiting for offense is not that different than trying to have a satisfying relationship with someone who has a personality disorder. They're still human. They're not evil. They'll act in ways that will push you to your absolute limit, and maybe sometimes you'll be convinced maybe they are, and maybe some of them are. Maybe some of them have other Machiavellian traits or
yes,
or, dark triad traits and other. So it's not it's not like they're not capable of evil, but normal people are capable of that too. So it's more like these are people in deeply suffering in real pain, and
right.
And anything can set them off. And if you're trying to navigate that, learning these skills is at least a way to manage it, right? And so the connection you're making to okay, well, how are you going to sort of wade out into the deeper waters of the culture war and try to find ways to have mutually satisfying conversations or mutually satisfying relationships with people who perhaps don't agree with you on everything? All of these skills are applicable, and And I know the word acceptance tends to set some people off, but
Yeah.
radical acceptance is this idea that you can hold that middle. Like,
Yes.
someone can tell you something, the most outrageous thing you could, it's like, it's just completely wrong. They're making things up. They're attributing motives to you. They're reading your mind. They're telling you things you're thinking
Yes.
that you're not thinking, whatever. Right. And you can accept that they are telling you what they believe to be true. And you can mirror that back to them. I accept that that's how it looks to you.
Yes.
Without adopting their reality. Right. It's a hard thing to do. And it's a practice, but
it's very disarming though. When you do that with someone, I've had this experience, even though no matter how outlandish and crazy it seems, all of a sudden, like you just see the rage just like disappear. It's unbelievable. It completely disarms that spirit when you accept it. It's radical grace kind of. But Chad, I know you got to go.
So a couple things. Hello, good morning.
Hey, bub.
Hey, Chad.
This radical acceptance, or let's say personalism, a couple things are striking me about something to do with sincerity culture and the idea that the sincerity culture and authentic culture that Paul talks about.
Mm-hmm.
They're a stack. They shouldn't be separated.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way that works. So you have to walk the line between sincerity culture and authentic culture together.
Yeah.
To make this work. It's like adopting. It's interesting. But so many things. So when I was listening to you on my way in, I was heading eastbound from my home on the interstate, and the sun was beating on the interstate highway, on the road itself, in such a way that the road looked completely white for miles and miles and miles. It was white, and this is really stupid, but I was thinking, it's really weird. So my experience right now is that the road is white, although I know it's black. And it's weird how my mind will know this, and yet it won't accept that the road is actually white right now because of my experience, my point of view. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the road is black. I don't know what the hell this has to do with anything, but it was kind of blowing my mind. And
it's like the blue dress. What's that dress? The blue
and the gold.
whatever.
Yeah. But I was thinking of if somebody who was blind all their life and then somehow could see, and they were in my passenger seat, they would have their experience of the road would be that it's actually white. They would have no context to know that the road is black.
Chad, can I riff on that quick?
Yes.
Okay, so this is this is like the definitional rational understanding is like if you are constantly inverting or subverting your immediate experience of the road being white to what it is black, is you're living in abstractions, and you're actually not living in your experience. You're actually not an empiricist. You're a scientist. So you're subverting your experience, your actual perceptions of reality, your sense perceptions of reality to a narrative. You're living in a narratival reality. You're living in, and if you constantly want to switch everyone to your narrative, this is where the postmodernists are right. It's like, no, the road is black, and you're an idiot. And you're denying their experience of reality. But that's just the way things work. And if you keep zooming out, though, this is why I love that George MacDonald quote. And you say, the fact is no man understands anything, is like, well, is the road black? Well, I don't know. It just depends. Like your experience of that in time and black and all those experiences, what if there's another experience that you could have future that you have no capacity of understanding, where what you now see as black is like what you're trying to tell yourself is the white?
Or ask any landscape painter to tell you how to paint a sky. It's blue, right?
Right.
Yes.
Depends.
Yeah, not really.
Right, it really does depend. It was kind of disorienting, actually, because I was like I know there's like a cognitive dissonance as I'm driving in. it was so white that it was more white than the white van that was driving next to me. Right? It was like this hyper white, and it was weird because it was like a weird kind of reflection off the road. The road wasn't wet. I don't understand. Anyway, this is kind of weird. The other thing I wanted to say real quick, and I gotta go. I'm doing my Saturday morning get together with my guys, which is such a blessing. There's so much I want to talk about. Yesterday, first of all, in the Discord, we were talking. A bunch of us were talking and reflecting on our experience with the corner, and Tim Keller came up, and PVK's relationship to Tim Keller came up, and how in the past Paul has talked about being in a really bad spot in his life, and having his Jordan Peterson-like moment with Keller. And he has not disclosed to any of us what this moment in his life, what this personal rupture was. But I was speculating that what God is so good that somehow he found a way to stay in that Paul found a way to stay in his life and just stay long suffering in his life and in love. And this really strange thing called this corner of the internet, this little corner of the internet, emerges and is like an answer to a prayer, and thus becomes an answer to a prayer for many of us. And this is this really weird thing, and I think it would not exist without what you're talking about with this radical acceptance. You could see Paul doing this all the time. He even brought this up in his video yesterday, in his membership only video on Peugeot, where he talked about this ambiguity thing, where there's just the right kind of dissonance you want to bring